The Giant's Challenge. The dojo was silent except for the rhythmic sound of feet gliding across the mat and the gentle whistle of the wind coming in through the open windows. Bruce Lee, then 28 years old, moved with the precision of a feline, demonstrating to his students the fluidity of Jeet Kune Do. His movements were economical, each gesture charged with purpose, a punch, a block, a spin, all executed with a speed that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Among the spectators, a man nearly 2 meters tall and weighing over 120 kilos watched with a mocking smile. It was Mike the Wall Callahan, a bouncer at a local nightclub, known for his brute strength and for never losing a bar fight. He had crossed his muscular arms over his broad chest and was shaking his head, as if he was watching a joke. "That's ballroom dancing, not fighting," he muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Some students looked at each other, tense. Bruce, however, didn't stop. He continued demonstrating, unperturbed. Mike couldn't contain himself. He took a step forward, his heavy boots crunching on the floor. "You're fast, Chinese, but you're too small to throw a punch that makes a difference. I bet a strong wind knocks you down." The dojo was silent. Bruce stopped, slowly turned around and looked at the man with a calm that only increased the tension. His dark eyes showed no anger, just an almost scientific curiosity, as if evaluating a rare specimen. "Do you think size is everything?" he asked, his voice soft, almost a whisper. Mike laughed, hitting his own chest. "It's not what I think, it's what I know. Look at me. Look at you. You barely fill one of my legs." Bruce nodded, as if considering the remark. Then, without warning, it moved. In an instant, he was at Mike's side. The giant barely had time to react before Bruce's fist, small, but precise as a bullet, hit his solar plexus. It wasn't a hard punch, not in the conventional sense. There was no bang, no drama. Just one touch, as if a rubber mallet had hit the exact target. But the effect was immediate. Mike's eyes widened. His face turned pale. He opened his mouth, trying to take in air, but his lungs seemed to have forgotten how to work. His knees gave out, and he fell to all fours, panting like a bull slaughtered by a single knife blow. The dojo held its breath. Bruce stepped back, adjusting the sash of his kimono as calmly as before. "Size is relative," he said, while Mike, still on the ground, tried to understand what had happened. "Strength is not in muscles, but in precision. And speed is what makes a man look small." Mike looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and astonishment. He mumbled something, but the words didn't come out. Bruce reached out his hand, helping him up. "The next time you doubt someone because of their size, remember, lightning doesn't have to be big to be deadly." And with that, he went back to teaching, as if nothing had happened. But the students would never forget that day. Neither does Mike. Years later, he would still tell the story, always with the same ending: "That Chinese man knocked me out with a punch I didn't even see." The master's legacy. Years passed, and Bruce's gym grew. What was once a small dojo in the back of a modest neighborhood in San Francisco now occupied an entire building, with spotless tatami mats, walls adorned with Mandarin calligraphy, and the constant sound of bare feet gliding across the wooden floor. But despite his success, Bruce never stopped being the same man who had knocked Mike down with a single blow. Among the students was a young man named Daniel, a 17-year-old prodigy who had arrived at the dojo with a letter of recommendation from Bruce's old friend, a kung fu master from Hong Kong. Daniel was fast, technical, but something about him bothered Bruce. It wasn't arrogance, like it had been with Mike, it was something deeper, a coldness in the eyes that didn't fit with the dojo's philosophy. "You fight like you're at war," Bruce said one afternoon, after a training session. "But kung fu is not about winning. It's about flow." Daniel inclined his head respectfully, but his fingers twitched slightly, as if holding something invisible. "I just want to be strong," he replied. Bruce didn't insist. "I knew that some lessons were only learned over time." The conflict came from where it was least expected. One day, while Bruce was out of town at a seminar, a group of fighters from a rival gym broke into the dojo. They were big, muscular men, specialized in MMA, and their leader, a former MMA champion named Victor, had an old grudge against Bruce. Years before, he had challenged his master to a fight and was humiliated, not with a knockout, but with a series of blows so precise that they left him breathless, unable to fight back. "Where is your master now?" Victor mocked, as his men spread the students across the mat. Daniel, who was training alone, put himself ahead of the others. "Get out of here," he said, his voice firm. Victor laughed. "Or what? Are you going to take me down like that idiot Mike?" Daniel didn't respond. His eyes narrowed, and in an almost imperceptible movement, he twisted his body, throwing a side kick that hit Victor's knee with a sharp crack. The former champion fell, howling in pain, while the other fighters hesitated. But the hesitation was short-lived. One of them advanced, and Daniel was forced to fight. He was good, very good, but he wasn't prepared for the brutality of the blows. A punch to the stomach bent him in half, and a kick to the ribs threw him against the wall. It was then that a voice echoed throughout the academy. "Enough." Everyone turned. Bruce was at the door, his kimono impeccable, his eyes dark as night. He didn't seem angry. He looked disappointed. "You came here to prove something," he said, walking slowly towards Victor, who was dragging himself away. "But they only proved that they don't understand anything about strength." Victor spat blood onto the floor. "You were lucky last time." Bruce smiled. "Luck is for those who don't know what they're doing." What happened next was too fast to follow. Bruce moved like water, dodging a punch, turning his body to apply an armbar to one of the men, and finishing with a sharp blow to Victor's throat, who collapsed, choking. The other fighters backed away, scared. "Uncontrolled force is violence," said Bruce, helping Daniel to get up. "And violence is the weapon of the weak." The following days were of reflection. Bruce closed the dojo for a week, and when it reopened, he gathered all the students in the center of the mat. "Kung Fu is not about defeating enemies," he said. "It's about mastering yourself. If you fight with anger, with hatred, you have already lost." Daniel lowered his head. He had understood the lesson. Years later, when Bruce had already left, taken by a sudden illness that took everyone by surprise, it was Daniel who took over the dojo. He never fought in anger again. And when a new student challenged him, as Mike had one day, he would smile and say, "Size is relative." And then, with an almost imperceptible movement, he showed them what a true master was capable of doing. Dragon's legacy. Daniel's dojo was no longer the same. The walls, once marked only by sweat and discipline, now bore photographs of Bruce in fighting poses, smiles in moments of teaching, and a wooden plaque carved with the words, "True strength is not in the blow, but in the stillness that precedes it." Students arrived in greater numbers, attracted not by the reputation of spectacular combats, but by the reputation of a master who taught without shouting, who corrected without humiliating. Among them, there was a girl named Lien. Thin, with eyes as sharp as blades, she had arrived at the dojo with bruised hands and wounded pride. She had been expelled from 3 other schools for a lack of discipline, which, in effect, meant that she did not accept being treated as inferior because she was a woman. Daniel watched her the first few days, noting how she moved, fast but uncontrolled, like a river that had broken its banks. In the 3rd training session, when an older student tried to correct his posture with a push, Lien responded with a punch that knocked him to the mat. The dojo was silent. Daniel didn't move. He just crossed his arms and waited. "You're not going to kick me out?" Lien asked, panting, his fists still clenched. "Why?" Daniel replied. "You fought. Now, let's see if you know how to learn." He didn't patronize her, nor did he spare her from the hardest training. But for the first time, Lien found someone who didn't see her gender as a weakness, nor her anger as a flaw. Over time, she learned to channel her rage, not to destroy, but to build. And when he finally understood what Bruce meant by mastering himself, his kung fu blossomed. Years passed. The dojo grew, and Daniel, now with gray hairs at his temples, began to think about who would carry on the legacy. It wasn't a question of strength, nor of technique, it was a question of soul. And among all the students, Lien was the one who most resembled him, someone who carried scars, but chose not to use them as weapons. It was one autumn afternoon, when the leaves were falling like copper coins in the courtyard, that Daniel called her to the center of the mat. "Do you know why I never fought in anger after that day with Mike?" he asked, while adjusting Lien's sash, which was now black. "It wasn't out of fear. It was because I realized that anger is like a chain. You can use it to drag others, or you can let it drag you. Bruce taught me how to let go." Lien nodded. She understood. "One day, this dojo will be yours," said Daniel. "And I hope you teach them that the greatest fight is not against an opponent, but against the shadow we carry within us." That night, as he closed the dojo doors for the last time as master, Daniel looked at Bruce's photographs. Smiled. And for the first time in years, he felt like he could rest. Lien took his place. And when a new student arrived full of arrogance, challenging her with a punch or a shout, she would just smile and say, "Size is relative." And then, with an almost imperceptible movement, he showed them what a true master was capable of doing. The inheritance of the void. The years passed, and Lien's dojo became a refuge for those who sought more than fighting techniques. She didn't just teach moves, it taught us to breathe between anger and calm, to recognize the weight of our own shadows before trying to overthrow those of others. Some students stayed. Others left, frustrated at not finding a worthy enemy, just a mirror. Among them, there was a man named Ren. He arrived with his hands marked by old scars and his eyes burning with a fury that Lien knew well. It wasn't the arrogance of beginners, but something deeper, older. Ren didn't challenge with words. He watched, tested limits with calculated movements, as if each training session was a silent negotiation. "You fight as if you've already lost," Lien said one night, after dodging a kick that could have broken a rib. "And you teach as if victory were possible," he replied. She didn't respond. He knew that some battles were not won with blows, but with time. Ren remained. And, little by little, something changed. Not in his fists, which remained fast and precise, but in his breathing. He began to stop before attacking, to hesitate as his anger rose. One day, after a particularly intense workout, he knelt on the mat, his hands shaking. "I can't do it," he murmured. "I can't let go." Lien sat down next to him. "Bruce once told me that the chain doesn't break all at once. It rusts, one link at a time." Ren looked at his hands, as if expecting to see the chain marks there. "What if I don't want to let go?" "Then you will carry her," she said. "But he won't be the only one." Asterisk. Winter came early that year. A snowstorm covered the city, and the dojo was empty for days. When the sky finally cleared, a man knocked on the door. He wasn't a student. He was a stranger, dressed in a worn military coat, his face marked by a scar that ran from his temple to his chin. "I'm looking for Lien," he said, his voice hoarse. She recognized him instantly. It was Ren's brother. "He's here," he replied, without moving. The man entered, his steps heavy on the clean mat. Ren appeared in the hallway, pale. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "You shouldn't have run away," replied the brother. Lien didn't intrude. He knew that some fights weren't his. The two stared at each other for a long moment. Then, Ren's brother extended his hand, open. "Let's go home." Ren didn't move. "It's not my home anymore." "Then do with her what you will." The silence stretched. The snow was melting outside, dripping onto the eaves like clockwork. Finally, Ren closed his eyes and exhaled. "All good." He turned to Lien. "Thanks." She nodded. "The chain is yours." But remember, you don't have to carry it alone. Asterisk. Years later, the dojo was still standing. Lien had aged, her gray hair tied into a tight bun, her hands still quick when she needed to demonstrate a movement. Ren returned, now with a young daughter, who watched everything with curious eyes. Is she going to train here? Lien asked. If she wants, replied Ren. The girl, named Mei, looked at the mat, then at Lien. Are you the master? I am. My father said you are strong. Lien smiled. Your father said I was patient. Mei wrinkled her nose. That's not so cool. Patience is what makes strength last, said Lien, extending his hand. Do you want to see? The girl hesitated, then took her hand. And just like that, the chain broke a little more.